Welcome to this week's edition of World Crisis Radio. It is Friday, April 12th, 2013. Webster Tarpley reporting from Washington, D.C. This week has marked a day of infamy in the history of the United States. The day of infamy was Wednesday, when the Obama regime sent to the Congress their proposed budget for the fiscal year 2014, starting October 1st. It is a very ominous and grim watershed. This budget contains a proposal to attack the two mainstays of what remains of the U.S. social safety net, Medicare and Social Security. This is the first time since the passage of the Social Security Act in 1935 that a president of the Democratic Party has dared to launch a frontal attack on the most important economic rights of the American people. Those rights, including an old age pension and medical care in old age, are the fruits of centuries of political and labor struggles. The moral and intellectual depravity of Obama makes it impossible for him to understand the huge historical labor, the effort, the human suffering that has gone into procuring those rights. Social Security and Medicare largely transcend political party. They are the achievements historically of the American middle class. It's the result of a struggle coming out of Europe and going back to the late Middle Ages. These are earned benefits. You have earned them. They have been paid for by you through a lifetime of contributions. This is your property. It belongs to you. No one must be allowed ever to tamper with this. These commitments, an old age pension and medical care, are sacred promises. And the support for them is overwhelming. It generally oscillates between 3/4 and 4/5 of the American people, between 75% and 80%. It is supported, these programs are supported on a bipartisan basis. Just this week, we've had a poll released by the American Association of Retired Persons, AARP. They asked likely voters over 50 about whether cuts to the entitlements to Social Security, Medicare, the economic rights of the American people are allowable. 91% of Democrats said no. 80% of Republicans said no to the chained CPI. We'll explain that in just a minute. Now, it is a peculiarity, let us say, it is the tragedy of the U.S. political system that despite the fact that 75 to 80 to 90% of the American people want these economic rights preserved intact, and I suspect that if they were asked, they would demand improvements and expansions and increases in the generosity of the benefits. Despite the fact that this overwhelming support exists, no political party, neither one, supports the preservation of the economic rights won under the New Deal, the New Frontier, and the Great Society. And this is the tragedy and the iniquity, the monstrous evil of Obama as a Wall Street puppet, a Wall Street Democrat. And this is his bid now to inflict permanent historical damage on this country. It may be objected that Bill Clinton attacked the Social Security Act already during his first term. He did indeed. The attack on welfare, the attack on aid to families with dependent children, was a feature of Bill Clinton's first term. The worst thing he ever did. It caused resignations in his own Department of Health and Human Services, HHS. He got himself on the cover of the Atlantic Monthly. The worst thing that Clinton ever did. One of the reasons we have 50 million Americans in poverty, living on food stamps with no medical care right now, is because of Clinton's abolition of a key part of the Social Security safety net. But for many people, foolishly, very short-sightedly, the program known as welfare was seen as something for other people. It was for the poor. It was not for the broad middle class. Now, quite a few of them have been horribly surprised by reality in the meantime, as they found themselves in need of welfare and couldn't get it. There is still something called TAMF, Temporary Aid to Needy Families, but this is a pale shadow of what welfare used to be. But now the attack goes against the two programs out of all of the social safety net, the two programs that every middle-class person, every working person, everybody in the working poor, they know they will need them. Medicare and Social Security are regarded as indispensable by the broad middle class. The bottom line on this is that since the public approval for Medicare and Social Security is so overwhelming, if these programs can now be successfully attacked and sacked and looted and degraded by a combination of the Wall Street puppet Obama and the reactionary proto-fascist and fascist Republicans, then no economic right will be safe. We will be on the slippery slope. No economic right or entitlement currently enjoyed by the American people will be safe if this attack is allowed to succeed. Since 1935, Social Security has been correctly regarded as the third rail of American politics. Any politician, any political thug seeking to loot, cut, tamper with this program was sure to suffer political electrocution. It was political suicide. You may remember that at the beginning of his second term, Mad Dog Bush the Younger, George W. Bush, 2005, announced that he was going to expend his political capital in order to privatize Social Security, to channel that money into the pockets of Wall Street hyenas, zombie bankers, brokers, and others. And despite the fact that at that time the Republicans controlled the entire federal government between 2005 and 2007, the presidency, the House of Representatives, and the Senate, all in Republican hands, Bush was not able to force through that monstrous project. Now, Obama is going to try it in a different way. Now, remember, this makes Obama a liar. He is a liar. Mendacity. He's lying to the American people. Is that impeachable? We'll soon find out. In his 2008 campaign, Obama formally promised the American people he would not cut Social Security. Well, that's what he's doing now. So he stands exposed in the eyes of the world as a damned liar and likely to suffer whatever moral and political penalties are involved with that. Now, who will pay for these so-called reforms? You can always tell the shill Obama media, the ones who shill for Obama, when they see a killer cut or a piece of genocidal austerity, they call it a reform. Savings or a compromise, another damned lie. We'll be back in just a minute on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley reporting from Washington, D.C. Let me direct you, as always, to Tarpley.net. Tarpley.net is your first source for any kind of understanding of what's going on in the world around you, and above all, a guide to what to do, how to take action, how to mobilize. This is not commentary and not analysis alone, but it is a guide to meaningful action and a demand that you take action right now. The mobilization we need is obvious. No cuts. Hands off Social Security and Medicare. Hands off all the other entitlements. Clearly understanding that if Medicare and Social Security come under successful attack, then you can pick your program. It will be decimated, whether it's WIC, the high-protein meals for expectant and nursing mothers and infants, whether it's S-CHIP, health insurance for young children of low-income families, whether it's food stamps, whether it's unemployment benefits, and so on down the line. All of that will come under merciless attack by the austerity ghouls now that Obama has opened the door of hell in terms of austerity. What we need is a lesson administered to Obama that will make every damned political thug afraid to touch Social Security and Medicare for the next 100 years and say, let's think of something else to do, whether we're in our first term or our second term. So it is the third rail, and perhaps that will be the case, we hope, in the days to come. But the answer is no cuts to Social Security and Medicare, no cuts, hands off, and pay for these services with a 1% Wall Street sales tax. If you do not have the 1% Wall Street sales tax as the centerpiece of the counterattack, it will fail because the journalist thugs, the prostitutes, the controlled media will ask, well, of course, we've got this deficit. What do we do about that? And unfortunately, given the mental degradation of our times, a lot of people consider that to be a cogent argument. Well, we have an answer. Yes, we do. We will stabilize the federal budget by making Wall Street pay. Remember, right now, Wall Street pays nothing. No corporate income tax. Bernie Sanders this week usefully pointing out that 1/4 of all U.S. corporations pay zero federal corporate income tax. They should pay 35%. They pay zero. And, of course, on those quadrillions and quadrillions of speculative turnover, the futures, the options, the indices, and combinations of those, the over-the-counter derivatives, the designer derivative contracts made in private, no tax is paid. You pay tax on shoes and clothing, in some states food, but Wall Street fat cats pay nothing on their casino gambling and speculation. So there it is in a nutshell. And remember, let us look at the people that Obama wants to invite to help balance the budget. Who's going to be affected by this? We're talking about the chained CPI. The chained CPI is simply this. The cost of living escalator built into Social Security and other programs, veterans benefits, disability benefits, and other similar programs. There is a cost of living escalator which is designed to, at least to some extent, reflect the inflation that goes on. I've always pointed out, and you can read about this in my book, the Surviving the Cataclysm, that Michael Boskin of Mad Dog Bush the Elder already doctored, fixed, distorted this COLA to underestimate inflation. So the COLA is already stingy. It underestimates, it chisels, it gouges. The Obama proposal is to make that worse. And the way they make it worse is they say, well, if you can't eat steak, then you're going to have to eat cat food. So let's not count that. Let's pretend that has no impact economically on you. That's really what it is. It is a cheap, dirty trick by the most corrupt academic discipline of them all, bar none. There's nothing worse than a professional economist. Nothing worse. It is the most degraded of all the areas of academic life, by far. So they've come up with this now, right? Servants of power, apologists for these malefactors of great wealth. So the idea is the coming benefits of Social Security and disability benefits and veterans benefits will understate inflation as time goes on. So it means that over time, the Social Security benefit and other benefits will get to be worth less and less and less. Now, remember, we could have been facing Romney right now. If it had been Romney, right around now, we would have been facing the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, right, with blood and gore flying in all directions. Romney would have attempted the privatization of Social Security or maybe even its abolition, which is what the Republican fascist fanatics, Rand Paul, Mike Lee, and so forth want, that it's unconstitutional according to their Confederate view of the U.S. Constitution. So instead of facing the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, we're facing the death of 1,000 cuts. We're facing the attempt to let this program and Medicare wither on the vine. Slow death, strangulation, but in installments. So we've got to fight back against that. That is the essence of the chain CPI. They'll argue, well, it's really a very minor cut. Yes, perhaps at the beginning it seems minor, but as time goes on, it gets to be more and more and more and more. And one day, lo and behold, Social Security is worthless. It's a vestigial organ of a social safety net which no longer exists. We have seen estimates here that Obama is going to gouge $130 billion out of Social Security over the coming decade. So $13 billion per year, which is very significant when you think that the average Social Security benefit is less than $1,500. It's about $1,000 to $1,500 per year. And again, that benefit is paid for. You have paid for that with your taxes. Obama is trying to rob you, to loot you. And, of course, the reactionary Republicans say, it's not enough. That's not serious. We've got to do more. We've got to destroy the program completely, privatize it, pour that money into the hands of Wall Street fat cats. So you can forget the Republicans on this issue in terms of reasoned opposition. The chain CPI must be stopped. Under no circumstances can this be allowed. Anybody voting for it must be primaried, rejected from office, and Obama is courting impeachment with this lunatic gesture. Back in a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Take a look at Tarpley.net, and you will find now available a early week wrap-up from Washington on Tuesdays. There is now a audio availability from yours truly. You can track this all through Tarpley.net, and it's a way now to see the Washington view, not just on Friday, today, but also on Tuesday. So the kickoff of the week and then the conclusion of the week. Therefore, Obama basically says that it's time to balance the budget on the backs of the old, the sick, the needy, the handicapped, people who get Social Security disability benefits, war veterans, military veterans, disabled veterans, amputees, single amputees, double amputees, triple and quadruple amputees, paraplegics, widows, orphans. Those are the people that will be hit by the chain CPI. I can imagine photo opportunities. Bring such people to the Congress and let those thugs seriously consider what they're doing. But the Wall Street fat cats and hedge funds pay nothing. 1/4 of all corporations pay zero corporate income tax and nothing, not one penny on quadrillions of dollars worth of turnover. This also it's an anti-woman measure because women are paid less. They rely more on Social Security in their retirement. It's obviously anti-black, anti-minority. The poorer you are, the more you need this benefit. So this proves that Obama is morally insane, in addition to being intellectually insane, because this is politically self-destructive, suicidal in the extreme. Now, if it's $13 billion a year, the big picture, what does that mean for the individual? Well, Huffington Post starts with, if you retire at 65, which is when many do, you can actually get Social Security some years earlier, but you get much less. The cut envisaged by Obama would be, by the time you get to age 75, you would lose $650 per year. By the time you get to 85, you would be losing $1,130 per year. So by the time you get to 75, you're losing about half a month of benefits. And by the time you get to 85, you're losing 1 month, more or less, of benefits. Now, what did Obama get? The Republicans, Boehner, the petty bourgeois from Ohio, says, no, it's not serious, it's not enough, and he wants all of this to be put forward as a standalone. Well, Obama says it's not a standalone. Obama sees this partly as a fig leaf, the taxes that he demands are a fig leaf. Boehner wants those taxes to be left out of the picture. Let's just vote on these killer cuts. And when I say killer cuts, this is now no longer an abstraction. Obama is saying the chained consumer price index. Concerning Medicare, he's talking about $400 billion of additional killer cuts. This puts us well over $1.1 trillion in killer cuts to Medicare, the $700 trillion embodied in the original looting under Obamacare. Remember, these are considered savings, reforms, and compromises by MSNBC, by Chris Hayes and others at that infamous network. The means testing of Medicare, above a certain income, Obama wants you to get a smaller benefit. That's a very bad idea, because you've got to have the full program available to everybody. It's a baseline for everybody. And if you try to do this means testing and gouging the benefit for people who have more money, you're going to be destroying the basis of this in political support. And then there are going to be other cuts in Medicare. And again, this comes out of those same groups that we said before: the sick, the old, the defenseless, the needy, the cripples, the maimed, the paraplegics, the amputees, the war veterans, and so forth. These are the people that Obama proposes to hit. And of course, Obama, as usual, a pervert, negotiates with himself. He's busy negotiating with himself in the White House, even assuming that Obama is willing to accept these things as a final result. Why put them into your budget? Why do that? What is the point? You can always argue the Republicans extorted these things from me. I had no alternative. But he doesn't do that. He puts it into his initial proposal. The Obama White House now says, this is not an initial proposal. This is our final proposal. Well, that is simply not the real world. That's your initial proposal, because the budget process is just going on right now. So you will be going through further negotiations. Therefore, the chain CPI and the $400 billion in Medicare cuts, including bigger copays. It's not just that wealthier people will pay more. Medicare notoriously pays about 80%, maybe 75, 80% of doctor and hospital costs. But the copay is therefore, the coinsurance is about 20%. Under Obama, that will increase. It is impossible to argue that $1.1 trillion can be taken out of Medicare with no diminution of the benefit. The benefit is going to go down. You can't get blood out of a stone. You can't say to hospitals, doctors, laboratories, medical equipment manufacturers, we're just going to gouge you $1.1 trillion. The Obama demagogy is still that this is the overpayment of the prescription drug benefit in Medicare Part D that was arranged by Mad Dog Bush the Younger, who wanted to get reelected and therefore was smart to do that. The Democrats still resent it. That's a Medicare Part D, an entitlement that the Democrats still hate because Bush implemented it and they didn't. So taking $1.1 trillion out of all that will mean some doctors leave the program, small hospitals shut down, small labs shut down. We had an article from Politico about that some months ago. Some other things in the Obama budget, a cigarette tax, 94 cents a pack to pay for universal preschool. How about the Wall Street sales tax, and you'll pay for preschool and more? Increase the minimum wage. That's fine, Obama, but that doesn't cost you anything. So we're not scoring that. The alternative minimum tax brought back, revivified, the Buffett rule embodied in that. To cap deductions at 28%, we'd have to look at the details on that. The estate tax goes from 40 to 45%. Let's see the details on that. Nice to see carried interest taxed at a somewhat higher rate, but nothing makes up for these historical crimes. It is a watershed. No Democrat has ever done it. Obama is, by any definition, not historically a Democrat, if you mean the party of Roosevelt, Kennedy, Johnson, and the entitlements. Now, let's look a little bit at these political reactions from inside the Democratic Party. The most ominous is Nancy Pelosi, the San Francisco liberal, who hides her right-wing substance behind a facade of support for ultra-left lifestyles, I suppose. She does not consider the chained consumer price index to be a benefit cut. So Pelosi, undoubtedly advised by her depraved husband, Paul Pelosi, is eagerly lying in the service of Obama and, above all, his Wall Street backers. Now, we do have 37 Democratic members of the House of Representatives promised to vote against any and every cut to Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. No raising of the retirement age, no cutting of the cost of living adjustment. However, this is not so great. 37 is less than half of the Progressive Caucus. So the Progressive Caucus has 70 to 80. Where are the rest of them? They're not even willing to put out a statement. So that looks pretty grim. Back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley in Washington, D.C. It's April 12th, and we're coming out of a week of infamy here in Washington. On Wednesday, April 9th, Obama's budget proposes killer cuts, genocidal austerity, deaths. You can score this not in terms of deficits, score it in terms of mega deaths. And you do get into the mega death range before too long with this kind of thing. And, of course, it's not as much as you would have had under Ron Paul or Rand Paul or Ryan, but mega deaths nevertheless. And we're going to be fighting this. I am happy to say that the banner of the United Front Against Austerity, UFAA, United Front Against Austerity, was there at the landmark demonstration at the White House in the street, Pennsylvania Avenue, on Wednesday, the 9th of April. We were there, and there was a banner that said, "No cuts, 1% Wall Street sales tax, and United Front Against Austerity." So let's just say a couple of the responses. These are really not so glorious, right? Less than half of the Progressive Caucus is out there opposing it. Senator Elizabeth Warren says she's shocked. Well, Senator, if you're shocked, you weren't listening to Obama's campaign speeches. $100 billion in Social Security benefits. It's $130 billion, Senator. So she's against the chained CPI. But what's missing here? The filibuster. We want to hear from Elizabeth Warren that she's going to filibuster. She's going to use a hold. She's going to use a filibuster. She's going to use every kind of parliamentary obstructionism and any other tactic to stop this from going through. Sheldon Whitehouse of Rhode Island also says the chained CPI is nothing more than a benefit cut disguised in technical jargon. Good. Tom Harkin of Iowa is against it. It's a bridge too far. You don't have to attack this program. Bernie Sanders of Vermont is doing something against this. He's terribly disappointed. He wants to block the proposal. He's the chairman of the Senate Committee on Veterans Affairs, and the disabled veterans would get slammed. Again, what I want to hear from these people is filibuster, filibuster, filibuster. If a clique of fascists on the Tea Party side with Rand and Lee and Rubio and these people can make so much of a stink, imagine the resonance of a filibuster that actually defends something that about 3/4 to 4/5 to 9/10 of the American people care about immensely. So, Krugman of the New York Times, as far as I can see, punted. Robert Reich did a tape, which I think was fine, for the Social Security Works. Again, UFAA is the only one that tells you how to fight it with an alternative. That if they ask you where the money's going to come from, you tell them, from Wall Street. So who do we have? The Campaign for America's Future is opposed. The White House demonstration on the 9th, I think that was Wednesday, they were, or was it Tuesday? The White House demonstration was there to say 2.3 million signatures they got. This is largely Social Security Works, going back to last autumn. Social Security Works is one organization. They say they have 1 million members. They say the cost of living escalator is too low already, and everybody's reminded every year. Then we have the Progressive Campaign Committee, PCCC. I forget one of the C's. They're there. They're opposed. Howard Dean's PAC, the Democracy for America, with Jim Dean, his brother. They say Obama's proposal is shameful. Primary any Democrat who votes for it. The era of triangulation is over. Another spokesman for this says this is a slap in the face to the Democrats who knocked on doors and volunteered for Obama. It hits at the foundation of what it means to be a Democrat. Primary challenges everywhere. Anybody who votes for this is not a Democrat. They should be primaried. Max Richtman of the National Committee to Preserve Social Security and Medicare. This proposal is malarkey. National Organization for Women. Obama is destroying the Democratic brand. We will remember in November. Campaign for America's Future is against austerity. MoveOn.org, with some, I guess Soros gave them something, not that much. An 80-year-old woman would lose 3 months worth of food every year with these cuts. Strengthen Social Security is against it. The Alliance of Retired Americans says the COLA is already too low. Here's the problem with these groups. A lot of them are very well-meaning. The Koch brothers are more generous than Soros. So if you look at these, the Tea Party groups, people like the Koches have been funding Americans for Prosperity, Tea Party Patriots, Tea Party Express, so on down the line. Soros gives less. And the other big problem, these groups are weaker, and they've divided their forces because they're spending at least half the time on gun control. They're wasting their time on this wedge issue. I warned you about this. Gun control is a wedge issue. Obama is trying to sneak through killer cuts under the cover of the fact that he's for gun control. Gun violence kills thousands. Yes. Killer cuts, Social Security and Medicare kill hundreds of thousands and millions, depending on how long it goes on. So this is bad news. Now, Obama is courting the defeat of the Democrats in 2014. If these key people stay home, if these Democratic activists stay home, the Republicans take the Senate. And he's also opening the door to his own impeachment. Obama, you've got to understand this. If you alienate these people, these are the one group that would actually fight for you, or up to now they would have and did, despite your betrayals. But now if you insist on directly attacking them and directly repudiating them, then you are impeachment bait. The Republicans can come after you when they want to. Good example, Back in 97, 98, Bill Clinton made a dirty deal with Newt Gingrich. They were going to do something quite similar, attack Social Security and Medicare. And it would have gone through. Along came Monica Lewinsky. The Republicans went mad. They wanted impeachment. The new Democrats, the right-wing Democrats that Clinton was going to rely on, they fled. The New Deal and populist Democrats decided to stand and fight. Clinton could see, if I attack my only defenders, I'll be removed from office. And he would have been, and he would have deserved it. So he relented. Now, what we need now is obviously a mass movement to stop Obama and the Republicans from cutting these things. We would need the resistance of the Tea Party fanatics. This is where evil can do some good. Let's get those evil Tea Party fanatics out there in the front row, counterattacking, saying, no, we will not allow any taxes, Obama. Your proposal is not enough. The other thing we could really use is a new Monica Lewinsky. Isn't there something out there? Obviously, it's not just the area of, I don't know, Monica Lewinsky or Reggie Love or something like this, but it's the massive assistance for terrorism that goes on, right? An administration that relies on Al-Qaeda to carry out its military policies in regard to Libya and Syria and elsewhere is in big trouble. That whole Benghazi complex, what's real in there is that the ambassador was shipping terrorists and weapons to Turkey in order to ship them to Syria. Now, another thing that I have to point out, my books have been massively confirmed. I regret it. It's not what I wanted. I wrote those books to try to avoid these tragic outcomes. But go back now, buy Obama, the Postmodern Coup, The Making of a Manchurian Candidate. That is from the first months of 2008. And then get a hold of Barack H. Obama, The Unauthorized Biography. And read them both. And you will see that this was all foreshadowed, including for the Potomac primary, February 2008, I wrote a leaflet saying Obama will cut your Social Security. Tell your elderly relatives he wants to take their pensions away. It's coming true. Buy those books and listen to what I'm telling you right now. Back in a minute. Welcome back to our second hour here at World Crisis Radio, the program recorded on Friday, April 12th, 2013. Therefore, I urge all persons of goodwill to take up the mobilization, no cuts, no austerity, hands off Social Security, hands off Medicare. They are of equal value. Neither one can be tampered with. And to pay for these things, impose the 1% Wall Street sales tax on all transfers, sales, changes of ownership in stocks, bonds, exchange-traded derivatives, and over-the-counter derivatives. That is what we need. That is the leading edge. Not a process reform, not Glass-Steagall, nothing like that, but the Wall Street sales tax. There is a depression. Obama wants to make these helpless groups pay for the depression. We reject that. We demand that Wall Street pay for the depression. That is simple enough. And buy my books. Learn that method. And if you can see that I was right about Obama, sadly, take seriously what I'm telling you now, because I'm telling you the next phase, and if you want to act meaningfully in the next phase, then you need to get busy in the way that I suggest. Now, Obama's got about, I think he's got $300 billion of new money for public works over the next 10 years, $30 billion a year. We don't need $30 billion a year in new money for public works. We don't need $300 billion in 1 year. We need about $3 trillion plus, $3 to $4 trillion in 1 year. And you don't get that from the federal budget. You get that by forcing the Fed to cough up. You force the richest part of the government to take up its share of rebuilding with 0% 100-year credit. that can be paid back over time and can indeed be attrited by inflation. That's another little secret in the whole thing. So that's those are really the two leading demands: the 1% Wall Street sales tax and the nationalization of at least part of the Federal Reserve now, for starters. We'll get the rest later. But to nationalize at least one credit stimulus window with $3.6 trillion to begin rebuilding the infrastructure of this country until you get the C grade instead of your current D+ grade from the American Society of Civil Engineers, whose work we're happy to cite in this connection. Now, let's switch to war and peace. Concerning North Korea, we basically have two hypotheses here. North Korea, the DPRK, Democratic People's Republic of Korea. On the one hand, it had occurred to me in the past weeks that this was simply the classic tactic of firming up the empire in Northeast Asia, scaring the hell out of South Korea, Japan, Taiwan, and others, scaring the hell out of them as a preparation to the attack on Syria. And you can see how that works, right? You force them to cling to the United States, and then you've got a free hand elsewhere in the world. It goes back to what was done 10 years ago before the Iraq War. But now there's another hypothesis growing in plausibility that there really is an intent to destroy North Korea. In other words, to sucker them into some kind of an attack and then crush the North Korean regime, right? Bury them under a hail of bombs. It might even be nuclear. Who knows? If they go nuclear, then the U.S., of course, can go nuclear 100 times over. To intimidate, horrify the Chinese, make President Xi lose face, and create a U.S. puppet state right on the Chinese border so that the Yalu becomes the hot line of demarcation, right? To destabilize China, to put China into a very, very difficult bind. And you can hear it, all the rhetoric is that China is responsible for what North Korea does. And I guess the election of Madame Park in South Korea had something to do with that. Now, we're sitting here waiting for the North Koreans to launch some kind of a vehicle. We are told through a backbench congressman that the DIA says that the DPRK can mount nuclear warheads on its SLBMs and IRBMs. It's short and medium range, intermediate range nuclear missiles. Who knows? But it's very few. And as they say, the reliability of these things would be low, and their confidence, I guess, is low to moderate. So what we're looking at above all is the blasé skull and bones operative, that wonderful Freemasonic death cult that has done so much for the United States, from Stimson to McCloy to McGeorge Bundy to Mad Dog Bush and George Bush, the skull and bones people. John Forbes Kerry obviously getting the things ready for the attack on Syria, and now also in South Korea. Look at the U.S. stance. It is absolutely absurd. I thought we didn't have the neocons anymore. The official U.S. stance is to refuse to talk to North Korea unless and until they destroy their nuclear programming. I guess their nuclear weapons. What the hell is that? That's the neocons ride again. Why do we need Barkey and the new look? And why do we need horse-faced John Forbes Kerry, the would-be face man? Why do we need him to say no negotiations? We will not accept the DPRK as a nuclear state. Well, it seems to be a nuclear state, right? Don't we want to be realists? Let's go back to one of the great statesmen of the modern era, somebody that all of these Lilliputians and dwarves could learn from. Cardinal Richelieu of France, and this wonderful quotation where he says, I have to stress for you the tremendous value of negotiating with everybody all the time. Keep negotiating with everybody all the time, no matter what. You'll always learn something. You'll always gain an advantage for yourself. So I would recommend, first of all, open talks right now with the DPRK. We have this message by way of the basketball player from the North Korean leader. He says, I don't want war. I want to talk. Call me. Call him already. Obama, how many hours did you spend on the phone with Erdogan of Turkey trying to con him into a war, into attacking Syria? Why don't you make a few phone calls to Kim Jong-un and tell him you do not want war either? What would that cost you? And if it turns out that the demand is a de facto diplomatic recognition, well, the United States has recognized regimes that are much less solid than the one in North Korea. The one in North Korea has been there for, 60 years? Why don't we recognize them diplomatically? What does it cost you? It allows you to negotiate. You can learn more. Remember the Hallstein Doctrine, right? The Hallstein Doctrine said that West Germany represents Germany, German Federal Republic represents Germany. The South Koreans may have problems with that, but the way you got through the Cold War in Europe without a war was to dump the Hallstein Doctrine, and the South Koreans can live with that in the same way that the Bonn government did in the 70s and 80s with the détente getting going. So, yeah, diplomatic recognition, de facto, of course. What do they want? Do they want a peace treaty? Well, it's been 60 years since June 1953, 60 years since then. What's wrong with a peace treaty? At least some kind of a document, something in lieu of a peace treaty, right? Maybe not a peace treaty, but something like the Helsinki Accords of the early 1980s, 1970s actually would be in order. The other thing is, if they want a non-aggression pact, that should be very easy. If your intentions are not aggression, then there's no problem in putting that into the form of a piece of paper. Stop with this Ulchi Freedom Guardian, Ulchi Focus Lens Freedom Guardian. Forget it. It's not worth it. Stop the provocations. No more B-2 flights. No more ABM deployments. No more Aegis cruisers. And let's get out of this without starting what could become a world war in Northeast Asia. It's not worth it. Back in a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C. So, jaw is better than war. And as Cardinal Richelieu says, negotiate with everybody all the time, and you will be better off. That's something you do for yourself. Talk now, de facto diplomatic recognition, some kind of document in lieu of a peace treaty, if you don't want to recognize borders for the moment. Non-aggression pact. Stop with these provocations. That's for Northeast Asia. Now let's look at Syria. Kerry, the skull and bones death cultist, once again, in the great tradition, meets with the death squad leaders in London. And we are told that Kerry, of course, were reminded by the people on National Pentagon Radio and the Diane Rehm show, Kerry is somebody who, as head of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, was way out in front. He wants to arm the death squads. He wants missiles and heavy weapons given to the death squads. Yeah, and don't take too many commercial airlines in that area after that fact, right? And, of course, the death squads under this scenario would get control of chemical weapons and all kinds of interesting things. I'm surprised some people don't get indignant about this. So we're told that the British and the French are pushing hard inside the European Union to lift the ban on arming the rebels. This is a fig leaf. The Italian government, and the Italian government means Monti, and it means Monti as his own foreign minister, right? This Terzi di Sant'Agata had to quit over a dispute between Italy and India. So that's Monti of the IMF joining in with the British and the French and Slovenia, for what that is worth. They're in favor of heavy weapons deliveries to the death squads. There was a G8 meeting in London this week. Russia, to their credit once again, and we salute them, rejected the demand to dump Assad. We are told by U.S. intelligence in the past week in some of these congressional hearings, the U.S. intelligence estimate is if the death squads overthrow Assad tomorrow, then there will be 1.5 years of chaos and civil war before an actual government emerges. Too bad if you die. And along the same lines here, Washington Post, Wednesday, April 10th. In Syria, fears of a new conflict. And it has to do with the fact that the extreme jihadi crazies are engaging in fights with the more moderate members of the Free Syrian Army. And in particular, the Farouk brigades of the Free Syrian Army, commanded by Abu Mansour, they have been fighting with the Jabhat al-Nusra in the town of Tal Abyad. Several instances in which factions inside the Death Squad movement have started shooting and killing each other. Abu Mansour of the Farouk Brigade says fighting is unavoidable. If it doesn't happen today, it will happen tomorrow. And we've also got the official Al-Qaeda, or the semi-official Al-Qaeda in the form of the Islamic State of Iraq, says that it is now a co-production. It has merged with Jabhat al-Nusra, and this is going to be called the Islamic State in Iraq and the Levant. I guess they don't hold Syria in a very high regard, right? But they're going for this. Now, I think in the meantime, the al-Nusra people have been indignant and said, no, we're not Al-Qaeda or anything of the sort. So, clear enough. But the lunatics of U.S. intelligence continue to support the death squads. Now, the answer here is minimally quarantine those terrorists and tell the Saudis and tell the gutter dwellers over there and tell all the Emirates and sheiks and feudal relics of the Gulf, back off, boys. Stop it. Stop those Saudis. Tell them no. And get serious. That if you did that, the basic demand for Syria would be get the foreign fighters out, stop the delivery of foreign weapons into the country. And this is now, again, quite serious. So, I would see these together. The I think still more likely explanation for North Korea is that North Korea has been goaded into a frenzy by things we see and things we don't see in order to firm up Northeast Asia on the verge of a new Middle East war. And this is now Obama. So Obama's right turn that we've seen now towards the end of March, about 2 to 3 weeks ago, Obama took a sharp right turn. Now, let's take a look at the heritage of Thatcher. Thatcher and the decline of the West. The deadly austerity we see, killer austerity, genocidal cuts that we see around us. This is the heritage of Thatcher. Ron Paul and Rand Paul would be inconceivable without Thatcher. Remember, Thatcher is a disciple of von Hayek through mediations, right? She had Sir Alfred Sherman, the right-wing extremist, practically a fascist, a former communist who created the conservative philosophy group. There's a speech from her guru, Sir Alfred Sherman, where he says, you have lumpen proletarians, you have colored people, and you have the Irish, and the only answer to them is well-armed police. Thatcher on record saying we could not have defeated socialism without Sir Alfred. So he's one of them. The other one, Sir Keith Joseph, who was a fanatic supporter of von Hayek. She actually met von Hayek a number of times. Thatcher brought in Hayek in 1975 when she became head of the Tory Conservative Party. She met with von Hayek. There's a meeting in 1975 where Thatcher holds up a copy of The Road to Serfdom and tells a group of people, this is what we believe in, and she pounds it on the table. In 1984, she made von Hayek a companion of honor for his study of economics. Word is that Hayek, that great friend of the masses, Hayek wanted to be a baronet. He wanted to get into the House of Lords. But she also had a guru. One of her backers was a poultry magnate who was also a disciple of von Hayek. So this is all the popularization of a crackpot, right-wing, para-fascist doctrine, that of von Hayek and the libertarians, which Thatcher, brought, you might say, into the mainstream of the Western world, and we are still reeling from it, with Obama cutting the social safety net. Back in a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C. Again, follow it all through Tarpley.net, Tarpley.net. You can find those books that I mentioned, Obama, the Postmodern Coup, The Making of a Manchurian Candidate. That's on Tarpley.net. Barack H. Obama, the unauthorized biography, on Tarpley.net. And Surviving the Cataclysm on Tarpley.net. Thatcher, we normally try to observe the de mortuis nihil nisi bonum, only good things to be said about the dead. In this case, unfortunately, the evil she did is so much a part of the current world that we must suspend that maxim and expose this mercilessly for what it is. It is essentially the rebirth of fascism in our time. So this is anything but an individual, right? The legend of the greengrocer's daughter from Grantham. This is a fraud. This is a very carefully coordinated international action with all kinds of elements being put into it. The general philosophy, as just mentioned, is that of von Hayek, which comes to her through Sir Keith Joseph, through Sir Alfred Sherman, through the various think tanks that they were leading, through various backers, Anthony Fisher, the poultry king, another supporter of von Hayek. In terms of her specific policies, as distinct from the general flim-flam, that would be Lord Victor Rothschild, a labor peer. From 63 to 70, he headed the think tank at Royal Dutch Shell. He was then assumed by Madame Thatcher as security advisor. He was part of the Center of Policy Review and staff. So he brought out the policies for Lady Thatcher. This was done through Lord Vic, who I believe at the time Thatcher was elected in a rotten borough or pocket borough, I believe that of Finchley, which through various machinations was actually controlled by Lord Vic. So her entrance into Parliament and so forth was indispensable. Lord Vic was indispensable for that. Lord Victor Rothschild. You're looking for Rothschilds. Here you actually found one in a very, very important role. Her public relations, Saatchi and Saatchi from Iraq. In the 70s, they made her into a product. They were selling her under Labour isn't working, UK better off under the Tories. Saatchi and Saatchi went on to become, for a while, the biggest ad agency in the world. Lord Saatchi today, I think, is still the head of the Tory Conservative Party. It's a little bit like Karl Rove, but in some ways more clever. Thatcher, obviously a sociopath in terms of her own mentality, when she says, there is no such thing as society. If you're homeless, you're on your own. Well, that's the voice of a sociopath. And this is what she then carried out. The greengrocer's daughter from Lord Vic's rotten borough, pocket borough. Remember, the British often used the politics of the United Kingdom as a show window for the policies they want to inflict on the rest of the world, undoubtedly on the U.S. So Thatcher is the dress rehearsal pilot project stalking horse for stupid Reagan, his union busting and his free market, deregulated, privatized economy. Thatcher was a reactionary grotesque, the kind of thing that people in the 60s would have considered impossible, relegated to the barbarous past, a barbarous relic. In particular, Thatcher milk snatcher. When Thatcher was the health minister, I think, in one of the Heath reactionary Tory government, or liberal Tory, if you want, in the governments in the early 70s, she became aware that every kid in a British public school, really public, right, a government-run school, was getting a free pint of milk from the time they were 7 to the time they were 11. Thatcher decided, it's communism! So the pint of milk was taken away, opening the door to pellagra, rickets, and scurvy. Reminds me of the Paul-Tards and their policies. Of course, this came out of the experience in Wales, in Scotland, in northern England, in the poor pockets of so much of Britain, starting in the 1920s even. But no, that had to be clawed back. Her policies then, deregulation, privatization, and deindustrialization. Industrial production in Great Britain, which once was the workshop of the world, was systematically destroyed by this woman. She destroyed coal mining, in particular. The British automobile industry has never recovered, and other forms of actual, tangible, physical production. The only thing left under Thatcher was a bubble economy based on financial services in the southeast quadrant, which has one of its apices a little bit above London. So if you're in Kent, it's great. If you're in London, it's great. But as soon as you get out of there, as soon as you get up to Sheffield or Manchester or Leeds or any of these places, you can forget it. And climate of absolute terror. In other words, travelers going to Britain in the 1980s would come back from northern England or Scotland and say, this is just terrifying what this woman did with her belief that there is no such thing as society. Small wonder that we've got people dancing in the streets in Britain. I think with the song from the Over the Rainbow, Ding Dong, the Witch is Dead, is at the top of the British hit charts now in honor of Thatcher. Without Thatcher, the international bubble economy, casino economy, deregulated, privatized wrecking of the Western world, which reached its climax up to now in 2007, 2008, none of that could have happened. We're even inclined to wonder, was there ever a dalliance between Ron Paul and Thatcher? And his little rand, possibly the fruits of that long ago dalliance? We don't know. Then we have international aggression. The Malvinas, according to the Monroe Doctrine, the Malvinas Islands are an integral part of Argentina. The United States views the Monroe Doctrine for 100 years or more, the basis of our foreign policy, authored by John Quincy Adams, one of the greats. That's part of Argentina. But under Al Haig and stupid Reagan, they bent over backwards to help the British to retake the Malvinas, the Falklands, which they never could have done without the treachery of the United States against the Inter-American system. So this was aggression, provoked, probably conned, right, through the not-so-smart Argentinian junta. And, at a certain point, Thatcher said, all these meat inspectors, we're tired of paying all these meat inspectors. We don't like all these regulations. Let's deregulate the meat industry. The result, mad cow disease, which is still with us. So from rickets, pellagra, and scurvy among the grade school kids of the British Isles to mad cow disease and all these other horrors, this is the result of Thatcher's economics. And it's sociopathic from beginning to end. Sir Alfred Sherman once said, Lady Thatcher is a great reader of lines. As long as somebody else is writing the lines, it's fine. But left to herself, she doesn't have a clue. And I think that's her mental abilities were about at that level. She, like Reagan, of course, succumbed to dementia later in life. So that's the profile on Lady Thatcher. And the quicker this body of doctrine is consigned to the garbage can of history, the better for all of us. Back in a minute. Back to World Crisis Radio. We just have to also recall the sadomasochistic overtones of Lady Thatcher, both in regard to the British people in general, the hectoring school mom, but in the cabinet, the constant threat of being literally thrashed with her pocketbook, with the sadomasochistic reign of terror, and the group that then overthrew her, Sir Geoffrey Howe and the Wets, the people who didn't want to stay the course, who wanted to pull back before manufacturing had been destroyed. They finally overthrew her on the eve of the first Gulf War. The other thing, of course, Thatcher implemented the Mussolini-Hitler policy in regard to unions. This is a good example of the limits of even the most militant trade union activity. The coal miners' union with Scargill and others, and other unions that joined in or didn't, brought the British government to its knees in the mid-'70s. But they did not have a political alternative, and that's an important thing to recognize. You've got to have a political alternative, and you've got to be ready to take over the country and run it. So otherwise, the union busters will win the day. She destroyed the Conservative Party in Scotland, the ability to bust up the British nation state today through this splitting, right, the mini-states, micro-states policy. This goes back to Thatcher. She's a destroyer of the modern nation state, a villainous of colossal proportions. Maybe we'll have to come back to this in future weeks. Now, in the meantime, the antics of these libertarian lunatics, of which she was one, right? Von Hayek, of course, paid for by David Rockefeller and then becoming the teacher of Thatcher. It all fits together. The Bitcoin, the Ponzi scheme known as the Bitcoin, the bubble known as the Bitcoin, blew up this week. $150 lost on one day. I repeat my recommendation. If you really want to get out of paper money and you don't, if there's no other alternatives, you better buy some gold. It makes a lot of sense to have some gold as a hedge, right? Have 10% or whatever it is if you've got money. Not many of us do. But if you do, it makes sense to buy some gold. Whatever happens to gold, gold will go up and down, needless to say. But it won't go to zero. And with Bitcoin, there is no guarantee. So we're now in the twilight of funny money. With Bitcoin, the funny money people were riding high. Max Kaiser has compiled a lamentable record here. He's been the Jim Cramer of the Bitcoin, pump and dump. The libertarian wacko birds, the chuckleheads, have gone massively into the Bitcoin. They think that they're attacking the modern nation state. They are simply transferring their own money into somebody else's pocket. A fool and his money are soon separated, I guess, and there it is proven again. So don't wait around for the bitter end. It raises the question, what's the value of a currency? Is a currency valued according to the amount of gold that backs it up? No. Production is what counts. Food that you can eat, transportation, a car you can drive, a house you can live in, appliances you can use, medical care that can save your life. If the currency of a country allows you to buy those things, if you need 1 million tons of grain, you better have some dollars because the United States can sell you those things. If you need some big pharma, if you need some computer stuff, the U.S. can still sell you some of that. That's the value of a dollar, not Fort Knox, not gold, not any of this alienated fetishistic stuff. Remember, all money is fiat money. All money results from a political decision to use some means or other as money. So forget about funny money. Forget about community currency. Or, as I view it, since I'm here in Washington, my community currency is the Federal Reserve. So let's take that over and issue $3 to $4 trillion. We'll channel that through the states into contractors and unions and workers, and we'll get a recovery. But you can forget the Bitcoin. And people like Max Kaiser who are ranting and raving about how bad bankers are, they steal people's money, they destroy value. Well, how are you any better than that if you're pushing this Bitcoin Ponzi scheme? They seem to recognize everybody's Ponzi scheme, but this one, raising all kinds of interesting questions. The tapes of the recordings there of the Mitch McConnell gang discussing how they're going to deal with Ashley Judd. Look, remember our point of view. Oligarchs can have no secrets. You want to get to be president, you want to get in the Senate, you want to control the nuclear button, you want to be able to control the vote on life or death, war or peace. We get to know everything. If this woman is indeed mentally unstable, we get to know. If she's a pantheist, we get to know. If she's a pagan, we get to know. If she's obsessed by patriarchy, we get to know all of that. Then we can decide. No secrets. We want to know your birth, your life, your crimes, your miracles, your pluses, your minuses, and so forth. But this doesn't, of course, we're looking for a good candidate to defeat Mitch McConnell. That would be a plus. But unfortunately, it looks like this charming lady doesn't fill the bill. On the other hand, we don't trust David Corn one bit. David Corn and The Nation magazine, Progress Kentucky, with Sean Riley and Curtis Morrison, I guess it is. Well, don't put your hand in the fire for such people. Now, Little Rand is running for president. We're going to pay attention to this over time. Little Rand is running for president on the basis of 0 accomplishments, 0 achievements, 0 qualifications. The little fellow thinks that he's entitled. And he went to Howard University, black college, right? Howard, Oliver O. Howard, good Union general, founded the Freeman's Bureau, many positive features. But he goes there and says, he represents the party of Lincoln. You don't represent the party of Lincoln. You represent a Southern regional party of reactionaries and racists. This is a radical anti-historical operation, radically anti-historical. I object to that stuff very much. Don't tell me you're the party of Lincoln. You're the party of the Southern strategy of Kevin Phillips, the appeal to racism, the Ronald Reagan kicking off his campaign in Philadelphia, Mississippi. We've got the Jesse Helms racists. We've got the Lee Atwater racists, Willie Horton. We've got the Strom Thurmond racists, the Trent Lott racists, and the Ron Paul racists. Look what they do. Let's get down to brass tacks. What's your line on the 1964 Civil Rights Act? I wonder whether these kids at Howard were well briefed on this. I heard fawning NPR interviews with Little Rand. Ask him about the 1964 Civil Rights Act. Public accommodations, buses, trains, hotels, restaurants, public accommodations in interstate commerce. Can they be segregated? Ron Paul, Rand Paul say, yes, you can segregate them. If you're a racist, you can act that out. They don't recommend it, of course, but that's your right. It's not your right. Under Anglo-Saxon common law, there is such a thing as a common carrier. Common carrier could have been the stagecoach, and today it's the railroad, the plane, the bus, the lunch counter, the motel, whatever it is. Those are common carriers. And they are common carriers because since they're providing this kind of service, they are quasi-public services, even if they are privately owned, and therefore the government has a stake in regulating them. So when Little Rand comes to your campus and tries to tell you that he's the party of Lincoln, oh, my Lord, then you've got to ask him, above all, about the 1964 Civil Rights Act. And, of course, you want to ask him about the Nosy Brotherhood down there. It is shocking that somebody with no achievements, no accomplishments, and no qualifications would dare to run for president. I guess after Obama, he figures the sky's the limit. I propose that Rand Paul be sent into early retirement, and I have a proposal for him. You see Fred Thompson out there selling reverse mortgages? Rudy Giuliani is out there selling identity theft protection. Rand, after your filibuster there, how did you stay out on the floor for 13 hours? I think we have a new public spokesman for Depends, that undergarment that allows you to filibuster on and on and on. So remember the mobilization. No cuts, hands off Social Security, hands off Medicare, pay for it with a 1% Wall Street sales tax. get a recovery, have a jobs program by nationalizing a part of the Fed as much as you can with $3.6 trillion in 0% century loans, and we'll see you next week on World Crisis Radio. Welcome to this week's edition of World Crisis Radio. It is Friday, April 12th, 2013. Webster Tarpley reporting from Washington, D.C. This week has marked a day of infamy in the history of the United States. The day of infamy was Wednesday, when the Obama regime sent to the Congress their proposed budget for the fiscal year 2014, starting October 1st. It is a very ominous and grim watershed. This budget contains a proposal to attack the two mainstays of what remains of the U.S. social safety net, Medicare and Social Security. This is the first time since the passage of the Social Security Act in 1935 that a president of the Democratic Party has dared to launch a frontal attack on the most important economic rights of the American people. Those rights, including an old age pension and medical care in old age, are the fruits of centuries of political and labor struggles. The moral and intellectual depravity of Obama makes it impossible for him to understand the huge historical labor, the effort, the human suffering that has gone into procuring those rights. Social Security and Medicare largely transcend political party. They are the achievements historically of the American middle class. It's the result of a struggle coming out of Europe and going back to the late Middle Ages. These are earned benefits. You have earned them. They have been paid for by you through a lifetime of contributions. This is your property. It belongs to you. No one must be allowed ever to tamper with this. Younger George W. Bush, 2005, announced that he was going to expend his political capital in order to privatize Social Security, to channel that money into the pockets of Wall Street hyenas, zombie bankers, brokers, and others. And despite the fact that at that time the Republicans controlled the entire federal government between 2005 and 2007, the presidency, the House of Representatives, and the Senate, all in Republican hands, Bush was not able to force through that monstrous project. Now, Obama is going to try it in a different way. Now, remember, this makes Obama a liar. He is a liar. Mendacity. He's lying to the American people. Is that impeachable? We'll soon find out. In his 2008 campaign, Obama formally promised the American people he would not cut Social Security. Well, that's what he's doing now. So he stands exposed in the eyes of the world as a damned liar and likely to suffer whatever moral and political penalties are involved with that. Now, who will pay for these so-called reforms? You can always tell the shill Obama media, the ones who shill for Obama, when they see a killer cut or a piece of genocidal austerity, they call it a reform. Savings or a compromise, another damned lie. We'll be back in just a minute on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley reporting from Washington, D.C. Let me direct you, as always, to Tarpley.net. Tarpley.net is your first source for any kind of understanding of what's going on in the world around you, and above all, a guide to what to do, how to take action, how to mobilize. This is not commentary and not analysis alone, but it is a guide to meaningful action and a demand that you take action right now. The mobilization we need is obvious. No cuts. Hands off Social Security and Medicare. Hands off all the other ever did. It caused resignations in his own Department of Health and Human Services, HHS. He got himself on the cover of the Atlantic Monthly, the worst thing that Clinton ever did. One of the reasons we have 50 million Americans in poverty, living on food stamps with no medical care right now, is because of Clinton's abolition of a key part of the Social Security safety net. But for many people, foolishly, very short-sightedly, the program known as welfare was seen as something for other people. It was for the poor. It was not for the broad middle class. Now, quite a few of them have been horribly surprised by reality in the meantime as they found themselves in need of welfare and couldn't get it. There is still something called TAMF, Temporary Aid to Needy Families, but this is a pale shadow of what welfare used to be. But now the attack goes against the two programs out of all of the social safety net, the two programs that every middle-class person, every working person, everybody in the working poor, they know they will need them. Medicare and Social Security are regarded as indispensable by the broad middle class. The bottom line on this is that since the public approval for Medicare and Social Security is so overwhelming, if these programs can now be successfully attacked and sacked and looted and degraded by a combination of the Wall Street puppet Obama and the reactionary proto-fascist and fascist Republicans, then no economic right will be safe. We will be on the slippery slope. No economic right or entitlement currently enjoyed by the American people will be safe if this attack is allowed to succeed. Since 1935, Social Security has been correctly regarded as the third rail of American politics. Any politician, any political thug seeking to loot, cut, tamper with this program was sure to suffer political electrocution. It was political suicide. You may remember that at the beginning of his second term, Mad Dog Bush the other entitlements, clearly understanding that if Medicare and Social Security come under successful attack, then you can pick your program. It will be decimated, whether it's WIC, the high-protein meals for expectant and nursing mothers and infants, whether it's S-CHIP, health insurance for young children of low-income families, whether it's food stamps, whether it's unemployment benefits, and so on down the line. All of that will come under merciless attack by the austerity ghouls now that Obama has opened the door of hell in terms of austerity. What we need is a lesson administered to Obama that will make every damned political thug afraid to touch Social Security and Medicare for the next 100 years and say, let's think of something else to do, whether we're in our first term or our second term. So it is the third rail, and perhaps that will be the case, we hope, in the days to come. But the answer is no cuts to Social Security and Medicare, no cuts, hands off, and pay for these services with a 1% Wall Street sales tax. If you do not have the 1% Wall Street sales tax as the centerpiece of the counterattack, it will fail because the journalist thugs, the prostitutes, the controlled media will ask, well, of course, we've got this deficit. What do we do about that? And unfortunately, given the mental degradation of our times, A lot of people consider that to be a cogent argument. Well, we have an answer. Yes, we do. We will stabilize the federal budget by making Wall Street pay. Remember, right now, Wall Street pays nothing. No corporate income tax. Bernie Sanders this week usefully pointing out that 1/4 of all U.S. corporations pay zero federal corporate income tax. They should pay 35%. They pay zero. And, of course, on those quadrillions and these commitments, an old age pension and medical care, are sacred promises. And the support for them is overwhelming. It generally oscillates between 3/4 and 4/5 of the American people, between 75% and 80%. It is supported. These programs are supported on a bipartisan basis. Just this week, we've had a poll released by the American Association of Retired Persons, AARP. They asked likely voters over 50 about whether cuts to the entitlements to Social Security, Medicare, the economic rights of the American people are allowable. 91% of Democrats said no. 80% of Republicans said no to the chained CPI. We'll explain that in just a minute. Now, it is a peculiarity, let us say, it is the tragedy of the U.S. political system that despite the fact that 75 to 80 to 90% of the American people want these economic rights preserved intact, and I suspect that if they were asked, they would demand improvements and expansions and increases in the generosity of the benefits. Despite the fact that this overwhelming support exists, no political party, neither one, supports the preservation of the economic rights won under the New Deal, the New Frontier, and the Great Society. And this is the tragedy and the iniquity, the monstrous evil of Obama as a Wall Street puppet, a Wall Street Democrat. And this is his bid now to inflict permanent historical damage on this country. It may be objected that Bill Clinton attacked the Social Security Act already during his first term. He did indeed. The attack on welfare, the attack on aid to families with dependent children was a feature of Bill Clinton's first term. The worst thing he